Hello, and welcome to Ancient Tale Weaver. Of all the quests in mythology, one stands apart. It's not just a story of a single hero, but of a team of the greatest heroes, demigods, and kings the world had ever known, united for one impossible task. It's the story of the first great voyage, the first longship, and the hunt for the single most powerful object in the world, the Golden Fleece. Today, I want to tell you the full story of Jason and the Argonauts. We'll follow them as they sail to the edge of the known world, facing clashing rocks, bird-women monsters, and a king who would sooner see them dead. It's a story of courage, but it's also a story of betrayal, dark magic, and a hero, Jason, who I think is one of the most flawed and realistic in all of Greek myth, because this quest wasn't born from a desire for glory. It was born from an act of treason, a stolen throne, and a terrifying prophecy that came true because of a single missing sandal. Our story begins not with the hero, but with the villain. In the land of Iolcus, there ruled a good and noble king named Aeson. He was the rightful ruler, and he had just had a son, an heir to the kingdom, named Jason. But Aeson had a half-brother, a man whose heart was as cold and ambitious as Aeson's was kind. His name was Pelias. Pelias saw his brother's new child not as a nephew, but as a roadblock. He didn't wait. He raised an army, stormed the palace, and seized the throne. He usurped the kingdom, throwing his half-brother Aeson into the dungeons. Pelias, the tyrant, was now king, but his victory was hollow. He was immediately consumed by paranoia. Like all tyrants, he was terrified of losing what he had stolen. He travelled to the oracle at Delphi to ask a simple question: how will I die? Who will overthrow me? The oracle gave him one of the most famous and specific prophecies in all of mythology. Fear the man, the oracle hissed, who comes to you, wearing only one sandal. Pelias, now obsessed, began a reign of terror, searching for any rival. Jason's mother, terrified for her son's life, knew she had to get him out. She announced to the court that her child had been stillborn. That night, she smuggled the living infant out of Iolcus, sending him far away to a place where no one would ever think to look. She sent him to the cave of the greatest teacher in all of Greece, Chiron, the wise and noble centaur. This was the hero academy of the ancient world. This was where Heracles learned, where Achilles would one day train. For 20 years, Jason was raised in the wild, trained in the arts of the hero. Ignorant of his true destiny, he was taught strength, but also diplomacy and leadership. When he turned 20, Chiron finally told him the truth. He was not an orphan. He was a king. His father was a prisoner, and his throne had been stolen. Jason, now a man, knew what he had to do. He said goodbye to his teacher, and began the long journey back to Iolcus to reclaim his kingdom. But his journey home was interrupted. He came to the river Anoros, which was raging, swollen with a flash flood, and on the bank he saw a pathetic sight, a frail, old woman, begging to be helped across. She was so old, she could barely stand. This, of course, was no ordinary woman. It was Hera, queen of the gods, in disguise. Hera hated Pelias, for he had insulted her temples, and she was looking for a champion to punish him. She was testing Jason. Would he, a proud young prince, stop to help a useless old woman? Jason, true of heart, did not hesitate. He lifted the old woman onto his broad shoulders and stepped into the raging torrent. The river was strong, and the old woman was impossibly heavy, but he made it. He set her down gently. She thanked him and vanished. Jason, exhausted, turned to put his boot back on, only to find it was gone. The thick, clay-like mud of the river had claimed one of his sandals. He looked at his bare foot. He didn't know it, but his destiny had just been sealed. He didn't care. He continued his journey and finally arrived at Iolcus. He walked straight into the city square, a magnificent, strange figure, a prince in rustic clothes, carrying a spear, and wearing only one sandal. The people of Iolcus stopped. They stared. They had all heard the prophecy. The word spread like wildfire up to the palace. Pelias was on his throne, celebrating. A messenger ran in. "My king, there is a man in the square." Pelias laughed. "What is it?" He is only wearing one sandal." The blood drained from Pelias's face. He looked, and saw Jason striding into the hall. He saw the bare foot. The prophecy, his doom, had arrived. Pelias was a tyrant, but he was a clever tyrant. He couldn't just kill Jason. The people were watching. They saw this as a sign. He had to trick him. He smiled, a false, welcoming smile. "My boy, you are my long-lost nephew, Aeson's son. Welcome home." He threw a great feast. "You are right," Pelias said. "This throne is yours. It is your birthright." "But," Pelias said, his voice dropping, "the land is cursed. Our family is haunted by the ghost of our ancestor, Phrixus, who died in a foreign land. His spirit cannot rest until his greatest treasure is brought home." "What treasure?" Jason asked. Pelias smiled. "The Golden Fleece." He told Jason of the fleece, hanging in a sacred grove at the very edge of the world, in Colchis, guarded by a dragon that never sleeps. "A hero's quest," Pelias declared. "Bring back the fleece, my boy. Lift the curse. Prove yourself. And the throne is yours." Pelias was certain. It was a suicide mission. Jason, young, brave, and naive, accepted. He did not know he was being sent to his death. He commissioned a ship. Not just any ship. The first great ship of its kind, built by the master craftsman, Argus. The goddess Athena herself, seeing this great endeavour, blessed the voyage. She fitted a magical plank of wood into the prow, a piece of oak from the sacred whispering grove of Dodona. The ship could speak. The ship had a soul. They named her the Argo. But Jason could not sail alone. He sent heralds to every corner of Greece. He made a call. "The greatest quest in history is about to begin. We sail to the end of the world. What heroes will join us?" And they came. I mean, you have to understand, everyone came. This wasn't just a crew. This was the Avengers of the Bronze Age. First, the greatest of them all, Heracles, the strongest man in the world. He was in between labours, or perhaps just bored, and he heard there were monsters to be fought, so he signed up. He was the muscle, the nuclear option. Then came the specialists. Orpheus, the divine musician, whose song could charm the very stones and trees. His music would be more powerful than any sword. The twin demigods, Castor and Pollux the Gemini, one a mortal horse-tamer, the other an immortal boxer. Then came the super-powered heroes, Aeëtes and Calais, the Boreads, sons of the north wind, who could fly, Tiphys, the greatest helmsman in the world, who could navigate any storm, and Lynceus, the man with superhuman sight, who, it was said, could see through solid rock and through the earth itself. And finally, you had the legacy heroes, the fathers of the next great generation, Telamon, who would one day be the father of Ajax, and Pelias, the groom from the disastrous wedding, who would one day be the father of Achilles. This was a crew of 50 demigods, kings, and heroes, and their leader, not Heracles, the strongest, not Orpheus, the most magical, but Jason, the diplomat, the man who could manage all these conflicting alpha male egos. That was his superpower. The ship was ready. The heroes were assembled. They were the Argonauts. With 50 oars, they rowed out of the harbour. The crowd cheered. King Pelias watched from his tower, smiling, certain he was watching 50 ghosts sail to their doom. They were sailing into the unknown, into a sea no Greek had ever charted, to a land no one had ever returned from. Their first stop would test their newfound brotherhood in a way none of them could have ever imagined. So, the Argo sailed. 50 heroes, the greatest of their generation, on the greatest ship ever built, heading for a quest that everyone considered to be suicide. Jason, their leader, stood at the prow, his one bare foot a reminder of the prophecy, his heart full of a grim determination. And he had his patron. Hera, queen of the gods, watched them from Olympus, her blessing protecting them from the sea, for now. Their first stop, I find, is one of the strangest in the entire myth. They landed on the island of Lemnos, and as they approached, they realized something was wrong. There were no men. The entire island, a powerful, wealthy kingdom, was run entirely by women. Their queen, the beautiful Hypsipyle, came to greet them, and she told them a dark story. The women of Lemnos had angered the goddess Aphrodite. As punishment, the goddess had cursed them, making them smell so foul that their husbands despised them and took new wives from the mainland. In a single, coordinated, murderous night, the women of Lemnos had slaughtered every single man on the island, every father, every husband, every son, all of them except one. Hypsipyle had secretly saved her own father, the king. Now, the women, their curse lifted, but their island empty, saw the Argonauts, 50 of the greatest heroes in the world. They didn't see invaders, they saw husbands. They welcomed them, they feasted them, and the quest came to a grinding halt. The heroes, seduced by the wine, the food, and the attention, simply stayed. Jason himself fell in love with Queen Hypsipyle. For an entire year, the greatest quest in history was put on hold, because the heroes forgot. Finally, one man had enough. Heracles. He had not joined the feasting. He sat on the beach, guarding the ship, his rage growing. He stormed into the palace. "Are we men, or are we playthings?" he roared. "Did we come here for this, or did we come for the fleece? We are heroes, not husbands. Jason, remember your quest." The words, like a splash of cold water, broke the spell. Ashamed, Jason and the Argonauts said their goodbyes and set sail. Their next stop was a happier one. They landed in a kingdom ruled by the young, kind King Cyzicus. He welcomed them as brothers. They feasted, and they left as friends. But that night, a terrible storm blew their ship backward, and they landed on the same island in the dark. King Cyzicus thought his city was under attack by pirates. The Argonauts thought they had been attacked by a hostile nation. A brutal night battle began, and Jason, in the dark, killed King Cyzicus. When dawn came, they saw their horrible mistake. They had killed their friends. This was the first great tragedy of the voyage, but the greatest loss was yet to come. The ship needed repairs. Heracles, with his immense strength, had snapped his oar. He went ashore to carve a new one. His young companion, his squire, Hylas, went with him to find fresh water. Hylas, a boy of incredible beauty, found a quiet spring. He knelt and dipped his pitcher into the water. But the nymph of the spring, Dryope, saw him, and she, too, fell in love. As Hylas dipped his pitcher, the nymph rose from the water, wrapped her arms around his neck, and pulled him down into the depths to be her immortal underwater husband. Hylas let out one single cry, and then he was gone. Heracles heard the cry. "Hylas!" He ran, smashing trees, roaring his friend's name. He was mad with grief. He plunged into the forest, searching, and he did not return. The Argonauts waited. The wind was favourable. The quest was calling. But their greatest hero was gone. Jason, the leader, had to make the hardest decision of the voyage: wait for the strongest, or save the mission. He gave the order. We sail. The heroes, bitterly divided, rowed on. They had abandoned Heracles. I find this moment to be the true beginning of the story. The easy button was gone. Heracles, The one-man army was out. From now on, the Argonauts couldn't solve their problems with brute strength. They would have to rely on Jason, on his wits, his diplomacy, and his luck. And they would need it. Because their next stop was the home of the Harpies. They sailed to Salmydessus, seeking guidance. They needed to know the path. They sought out the king, Phineus, the greatest prophet in the world. They found him, but he was a wretch, a living skeleton, starving to death. "Help me," he rasped. "The gods, they have cursed me." Phineus's crime was that he could see the future too well. As a punishment, Zeus had cursed him. He was blind, and he could never eat. The Argonauts, pitying him, set a great feast, but the moment the food was laid out, they came. The Harpies, the hounds of Zeus, disgusting, foul-smelling bird-women, who swooped down from the sky at impossible speeds. They snatched most of the food, and what they didn't steal, they covered in their own foul-smelling droppings. Phineus was left, day after day, with a plate of filth, starving, while his tormentors cackled from the sky. "Help me," Phineus begged. "Free me from this curse, and I will tell you the path to Colchis." Jason looked at his crew. Brute strength couldn't stop them. They were too fast. But he didn't have Heracles. He had something better. He had Aeëtes and Calais, the winged sons of the north wind. "This," they said, drawing their swords, "is our hunt." They set the feast again. The Harpies swooped. But this time, the Boreads launched. An incredible aerial battle began. The winged heroes, faster than the storm, chased the Harpies through the sky. They were about to kill them, but Iris, the messenger of the gods, appeared in a rainbow. "Stop," she commanded. "Do not kill the hounds of Zeus. I swear, they will never return." The Boreads returned, victorious. The curse was broken. Phineus wept with joy as he ate his first meal in years, and then he gave them their prophecy. He told them the path, but he also gave them a terrifying warning, a final gateway. "To reach Colchis," he rasped, "you must pass the one thing no ship has ever survived. The Symplegades, the clashing rocks." This, I believe, was the ancient Greek way of explaining the treacherous Bosphorus Strait, a narrow, violent passage of water that separates Europe and Asia. In the myth, they weren't just rocks, they were alive. Two colossal, sheer cliffs of rock that guarded the pass. And they were in constant motion, clashing together with godlike force, crushing any ship that dared to sail between them. "You cannot beat them," Phineus had warned. "You can only trick them. When you arrive, you must send a test first. Release a dove. Let it fly between them." "Why?" Jason had asked. "Because," the prophet said, "you must see if the fates will allow you to pass. If the dove makes it through, you might make it. If the dove is crushed, turn back. Your quest is doomed." They reached the pass. The water was churning. The sound of the rocks grinding was deafening. "Now!" Jason yelled. He released the dove. The small, white bird flew with all its might, straight into the dark, narrow channel. The Argonauts watched, hearts in their throats. The rocks began to move. They crashed together with the sound of a mountain breaking. The rocks ground against each other, and then began to pull apart, readying for their next clash. And the Argonauts saw it. The dove, flying free on the other side, missing only its tail feathers. The fates had willed it. "Now!" Jason roared. "The oars! Row for your lives! Row as you have never rowed before!" The 50 greatest heroes of Greece pulled as one. The Argo leapt forward into the gap. They were in the passage, but the rocks were closing. They could feel the spray. They could feel the grinding stone. The magical prow of the ship screamed in terror. The rocks were upon them, and they burst through. The cliffs crashed together one final, violent time behind them, just clipping the very end of the ship's stern ornament. shattering it. But they were through. They had done it, and, having failed, the curse of the Symplegades was broken. They froze, and never clashed again. The Argonauts collapsed, cheering, weeping with relief. They had passed the impossible gateway. They were in the Pontus Euxinus, the Black Sea, the unknown. They had sailed to the very edge of the world, and there, on the dark, misty, and hostile horizon, they finally saw it, the shores of Colchis, the land of the Golden Fleece. The clashing rocks were behind them. The Black Sea had been breached. After all the loss, all the trials, the Argo finally sailed into the harbour of Aea, the capital city of Colchis. This was the edge of the known world. This wasn't Greece. This was a land of ancient, dark magic, ruled by a king who was not known for his kindness. This was the land of King Aeëtes, son of the sun god Helios, and he was the guardian of the Golden Fleece. Jason knew, as I'm sure you do, that you can't just sail up and ask for a kingdom's most powerful magical artifact. He had to be a diplomat. He had to be the leader his crew needed. Jason, along with his most eloquent heroes, walked into the throne room of King Aeëtes. He was polite. He was respectful. He told his story. "Great king," he said, "I am Jason of Iolcus, a usurper. My uncle Pelias has sent me on this impossible quest. He has demanded I retrieve the Golden Fleece, the relic of our ancestor, Phrixus, to bring peace to his spirit. I do not wish for war. I ask for the fleece as a supplicant. In return, I and my heroes will fight for you. We will conquer any enemy you name. We will give you the eternal friendship of Greece." Aeëtes listened, and as he listened, his heart filled with a black, boiling rage. He didn't see a hero. He saw a thief. He saw a band of arrogant Greek pirates who had sailed across the world to steal his most prized, God-given possession. "You, a hero?" Aeëtes sneered. "You look like a slave. You come to my house, eat my bread, and then you ask to steal my treasure. I should have you all killed where you stand." But he couldn't. He, too, had to respect the laws of hospitality, and he saw a way to dispose of them for good. "Fine," the king smiled, a terrible, false smile. "You claim to be a hero. You claim the gods are on your side. I will give you the fleece, if you can pass a simple test. A test of my kingdom's strength." He explained the test. It was quite simply impossible. First, Jason would have to go to the field of Ares. There, he would have to, alone, yoke the Calcataroi. "What are those?" Jason asked, his blood running cold. Aeëtes laughed. "Oh, just two, immortal, fire-breathing bulls, forged by Hephaestus himself. If you can yoke them, you must then plough the entire field. But that's not all. You must then sow the field with these." He showed Jason a helmet filled with dragon's teeth. "And when you plant them," the king smiled, "an army of undead stone warriors, the Spartoi, will spring from the earth, and you must kill them all. Single-handedly, do this by sunset, and the fleece is yours." Jason was speechless. He was a diplomat, not a god. He returned to the Argo, his heart heavy. He told the crew. They were in despair. Even Heracles would have struggled. Jason, the hero, was doomed. He had led his men to their deaths. But someone else had been watching the confrontation in the throne room. Aeëtes had a daughter, a young princess named Medea. But Medea was different. She was not a normal princess. She was a high priestess of Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft. She was, perhaps, the most powerful sorceress in the mortal world, and from the shadows of the throne room she had looked at this handsome, doomed, foreign hero. And at that very moment, up on Olympus, Hera, Jason's protector, saw her chance. "He can't win with strength," Hera said to Aphrodite. "He must win with magic. Your magic." Aphrodite agreed. She called her son Eros. "Go," she commanded. "Strike the heart of the witch princess. Make her fall in love with Jason, a love so deep, so violent, she will betray her own father to save him." The golden arrow flew. It struck Medea, and in an instant her entire world, her loyalty, her family, meant nothing. A divine, magical, agonizing love for Jason flooded her system. She was now obsessed with him. She knew her father's test was a death sentence. She knew she had to choose. Betray her country and her king, or watch the man she was fated to love be burned alive. She chose Jason. That night, she snuck out of the palace. She sent a message to Jason to meet her, alone, at the shrine of Hecate. Jason, desperate, went. Medea, her voice trembling, revealed her plan. "I will save you," she whispered, "but you must swear an oath to the gods, that you will take me with you, that you will make me your wife." Jason, seeing his only hope, swore the oath instantly. Medea smiled. She gave him her gift, a small jar of ointment. "This," she said, "is my magic. It is made from the flower that sprang from the blood of Prometheus. Smear it on your body and on your weapons. For one day, no fire and no bronze can harm you." She also gave him a second piece of advice. "For the dragon-teeth warriors," she whispered, "they are invincible. Do not fight them. Confuse them." The next day, the entire city of Colchis gathered to watch the Greek hero die. Jason walked onto the field of Ares, alone. He had secretly applied Medea's ointment. He called for the bulls. King Aeëtes smiled and opened the gates. The two bronze bulls, the Calcotauroi, thundered out, snorting great plumes of actual fire. They charged. The crowd gasped. But Jason did not move. He stood, and the fire washed over him. It did not burn. His skin, protected by Medea's magic, was invulnerable. The bulls, confused, charged again. But Jason, now as strong as Heracles, met them. He seized the first bull by the horns and wrestled it to the ground. He seized the second. The crowd was silent, stunned. In a feat of impossible strength, he forced the yoke onto their bronze necks. He took the plough, and he began to plough the field of Ares. He ploughed the entire field. Then he took the helmet of dragon's teeth, and he sowed the field. He planted the seeds of war. He stood back, and he waited, and then the earth began to move. First, a skeletal hand, then a helmet, then a shield. All around him, an army of stone and bone warriors, the Spartoi, clawed their way from the ground. 100 of them, 1,000, they drew their swords, and they all turned to face him. He was one man against an army, but he remembered Medea's advice. Do not fight them, confuse them. He picked up a massive stone, and he hurled it right into the middle of the undead army. The rock struck a warrior. That warrior, confused, turned and struck the warrior next to him. That warrior struck back. In a moment, the Spartoi, blinded by a magical, brother-killing rage, forgot all about Jason. They turned on each other. A horrific, chaotic melee began. The earth-born army destroyed itself. Jason stood aside and simply watched. When only a few wounded were left, he drew his sword and finished the job. The field was silent. The army was dead. The sun was beginning to set. The crowd was silent, in awe. Jason had done it. He had passed the impossible test. He turned to King Aeëtes, who was not applauding. The king's face was purple with rage. He knew. He knew Jason could not have survived the fire. He knew his own daughter. Medea had betrayed him. You have passed, Aeëtes said, his voice a low growl. Come back tomorrow, and you shall have your prize. Jason bowed, but he saw Medea in the crowd. She was terrified. She drew a single finger across her throat. The message was clear. Her father was lying. He had no intention of giving up the fleece. He was going to ambush them. He was going to kill them all. That night, Medea fled the palace. She ran to the Argo. "We have to go," she panted. "Now. My father is gathering his armies. He will burn your ship at dawn." "But the fleece!" Jason cried. "I cannot leave without it." Medea looked at him, her face set. "Then we take it. Together. I am the only one who can get you past the final guardian." She led him, alone, into the darkness, to the sacred grove of Ares. They arrived. And I mean, just imagine the scene. There it was, the Golden Fleece, glowing, lighting the entire grove with a divine golden light. It was real, but between them and the tree was the dragon. It was a colossal, serpent-like beast, its scales invulnerable, its fangs dripping venom. And, it was said, it never slept. It saw them. It rose, hissing, ready to strike. Jason drew his sword, but Medea put a hand on his chest. "Your strength is useless here." This was her battle. She, the priestess of Hecate, stepped forward. She began to chant, a low, ancient, magical lullaby. She sprinkled herbs and potions into the air. The dragon hissed, fighting the magic. But Medea's power was immense. She sang of sleep. She sang of darkness. And the dragon's great, sleepless eyes began to flicker. The hissing softened to a rumble. The great head swayed, and for the first time in a century, the dragon of Colchis fell asleep. "Now," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Go!" Jason didn't hesitate. He scrambled up the tree, over the sleeping coils of the monster. He reached the fleece. He tore it from the branches. It was his. It was done. He grabbed Medea's hand. "Run!" They ran. They didn't look back. They ran to the Argo, where the heroes were waiting, terrified. "We have it!" Jason roared, holding up the fleece. The Argonauts screamed in triumph. "Set sail! Row!" They rowed with all their might, out of the harbour, into the darkness. Just as the alarms of Colchis began to scream, King Aeëtes had woken up. But Aeëtes was not a fool. He had the fastest ships in the Black Sea. He gave chase, and his lead ship was commanded by his son, Medea's own brother, Prince Aeëtes. The chase was on, and the Colchian fleet was faster. They were gaining. The Argonauts, exhausted, were going to be caught. They were going to be slaughtered. Jason, in despair, looked to Medea. "Your magic, do something." And Medea did. She performed her final, most horrific, most unforgivable act of betrayal. The myths here are dark, but the most common one is this. She had brought her own young brother, Aeëtes, with her onto the Argo as a hostage, and now she took him. As her father's ship gained on them, she killed her brother. She cut his body into pieces, and she dropped them, one by one, into the sea. King Aeëtes, on his lead ship, saw it. He saw the pieces of his son floating in the water. He, the barbarian king, was paralyzed by horror and grief. He had to stop. He had to stop his entire fleet, to gather the pieces of his child for a proper burial. This was the price of the fleece. Medea, the witch, had saved them. She had sacrificed her own family, her own soul. The Argo sailed away in a stunned, horrified silence. They had the prize. But they had lost everything else. Their journey home was cursed. The gods, disgusted by the murder, sent them on a long, agonizing detour. They had to be purified. They sailed past the island of the Sirens, whose song made sailors crash their ships. But the Argonauts had Orpheus. He played his own lyre, a song so beautiful and louder than the Sirens that he saved them all. They sailed between the monster Scylla and the whirlpool Charybdis, barely surviving. After months or perhaps years of wandering, battered and haunted, the Argo finally returned home to Iolcus. Jason, now a hardened, haunted man, walked into the throne room of his uncle. He was not wearing one sandal. He was wearing the destiny of a king. He threw the Golden Fleece at Pelias' feet. "I have done it," he said, his voice like iron. "I have lifted the curse. Now, keep your promise. Give me my kingdom." King Pelias, the tyrant, looked at the fleece, and he laughed. He was old, but he was not a man of honour. He refused. "You have no army here, boy," he sneered. "I will keep my throne." Jason, the hero, had failed. He had won the quest, but he could not win his home. He was powerless, but Medea was not. The witch, who had sacrificed everything for Jason, would not be denied. She went to the daughters of Pelias, in secret. "Your father is old," she smiled. "I have a magic to make him young again." To prove it, she took an old ram, cut it into pieces, and boiled it in a cauldron with magic herbs. A young, vital lamb jumped out. The daughters were convinced. That night, in their love for their father, they killed Pelias. They cut him apart, and they boiled him, waiting for their father to be reborn. But he never was. He was just dead. Medea had tricked them into patricide. Jason had his throne, but it was a throne won not by heroism, but by black magic and murder. The people of Iolcus, terrified of Medea, exiled them both. The quest, in the end, had gained him nothing. His story ends in tragedy. He and Medea fled to Corinth, where he betrayed her, abandoning her for a new, younger princess. Medea, in her rage, would murder their children. Jason was left, an old, broken, lonely man. He had won the fleece, but lost his honour, his kingdom, his friends, and his family. Years later, he returned to Iolcus, a nobody. He sat on the beach, weeping, under the shadow of his one great accomplishment, the rotting, beached hulk of the Argo, and it was there that his story ended. A piece of the magical prow, the same prow that had guided him, broke loose, fell, and struck him dead. It's one of the darkest, most complicated stories in all of mythology. It's a story I think serves as a profound warning that a quest, even a heroic one, can be a curse, and that sometimes the pursuit of glory is the very thing that destroys us.